What's up, everybody? It's FYGP, and today I want to take a look at really where it all began, the global power elite, how a lot of these structures came to be. And there you need to look no further than Carroll Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, which actually describes the formation of the Federal Reserve. It describes the formation of the Anglo-American establishment. Well, his second book is even more eye-opening, The Anglo-American Establishment. We're going to delve into both of those here as well. But we're going to keep it, in the first part, we're going to just keep it to what happened in the early 20th century, how the United States got its Federal Reserve, how the United States became the world policeman, or was on the way to becoming the world policeman, how all of that came into fruition. So that's going to be really interesting. We can skip right through the book, Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. So, here we go, yeah. It's written in 1966 and explores the history of Western civilization, and of course, America essentially in the spotlight. The book discusses the rise of the modern nation-state and the growth of international capitalism, as well as the role of secret societies and elite networks in shaping political and economic behavior. Power. Quigley argues that the history of the 20th century has been dominated by the struggle of two opposing forces, the forces of freedom and democracy, and the forces of oligarchy and tyranny. So, you have to understand that Carroll Quigley was a professor at Georgetown University, and he had access to the CFR documents, which documented a lot of stuff that went on back in the day. And he was essentially a man who was pro-neoliberalism, who was pro-neoliberal world order. So for him, the forces of democracy and freedom were the United States and Britain and France in both world wars, whereas the forces of oligarchy and tyranny essentially, Nazi Germany and Russia, Soviet Russia. So he was a supporter of the global power elite. He was a professor at Georgetown. He was the mentor to Bill Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and many other politicians who were so-called elected. So that is where Carroll Quigley comes from. He was a part of the establishment for a long time. Not the inner circle, but he was an educator for the people that the establishment would put into power one day. That is where Carroll Quigley came from. So, the book contends that the main goal of the Anglo-American establishment, or the Western power elite, was to force wars between Germany and Russia. Because Russia has the resources, Russia has the manpower, Russia has, the vastness of land that needs to be inhabited, while Germany has the industrial capacity to produce things out of those Russian resources. Germany has the capabilities to finance Russia and modernize it in an alliance. And that is why the Anglo-American establishment always created rifts between Slavs and Germanic peoples, and Russia and Germany, for that matter. So Austria-Hungary also, as a great power back then, was of course tied in with all of this, but they're essentially also Germanic peoples. So the fighting between the Slavs and the Germanic peoples has oftentimes been initiated by the Anglo-American establishment, just because Germany and Russia were the two biggest geopolitical rivals. Germany was the more imminent rival, since it was rapidly industrializing. Well, Russia was as well, but Germany had already a huge industrial base and could threaten even, according to some British projections, even the British naval hegemony around the globe, if they had, waited. If World War I wouldn't have broken out sooner. So essentially what it comes down to is the causing of the trouble between Germany and Russia. Quigley argues that the goal of the British in the world was to destroy the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires. He also suggests that, of course, Russia also being a representative of orthodoxy, of course, he also and Austro-Hungary also being one of the oldest monarchies in Europe and one of the defenders of the old order, of the old, monarchic system. And this system had to go away. Of course, the Tsar had to go away. The Kaiser had to go, right? The world had to be run by the banksters. That is essentially what World War I was about. So he also suggests that the struggle between has been driven by a small and powerful group of individuals who seek to consolidate their power and control over the world's resources. Despite this, its controversial subject matter, Trading Hope is widely regarded as an outstanding work of 20th century history. Yeah, so he was an archivist for the CFR, for the Council of Foreign Relations, essentially one of the prime U.S. policy think tanks, if not the prime one. People from, if you want to take a look at what U.S. policy will look like, you just take a look at the CFR. In fact, even the head of Stratford actually said that this war is about severing the relation. Even the current war in Ukraine is about severing the relationship between Germany and Russia. The head of Stratford said that. We can pull up the clip right now just for you to see that. So here we go. George Friedman, head of Stratford, the think tank, saying that a Germany-Russia alliance would be the biggest threat to U.S. hegemony.
Primordial interest of the United States, over which for a century we have fought wars, the First, Second Cold War, has been the relationship between Germany and Russia, because united they are the only force that could threaten us, and to make sure that that doesn't happen. For the United States, the primordial fear is Russian capital, Russian technology, German technology and German capital, Russian natural resources, Russian manpower, as the only combination that has for centuries scared the hell out of the United States.
So yeah, that's essentially what it is about. And of course, China has the industrial base today to rival the United States, of course, as a superpower. And with a alliance between Russia and China, this can be achieved as well. But Russia and China are much more culturally different than Russia and Germany. And Russia and Germany is a more natural alliance, but this has been sabotaged throughout the history, as actually exemplified right here by George Friedman. So we go to the second book of Carroll Quigley, and it's titled, excuse me one moment. So yeah, here's the second book. It's called The Anglo-American Establishment, and it was actually published post-mortem by Carroll Quigley. And Carroll Quigley, he died of a heart attack, and he actually retired at his position as Professor Emeritus from Georgetown University. So he first retired, and then he obviously had a heart attack and died. So that's a bit suspicious, of course, considering how many people are killed by heart attacks all the time. So this book was published post-mortem by him because some of the information was probably too edgy to be published during his lifetime. But it was written in 1949 and provides an in-depth analysis of the evolution of the secret society in the United States and Britain that played a major role in shaping the political and economic systems of both countries. Of course, not only those two countries, but the whole world. Quigley argues that these secret societies, which he calls the Anglo-American establishment, was composed of a network of wealthy and influential individuals who shared common value sets and goals. He suggests that his network had its roots in the 19th century and became increasingly influential in the early 20th century as Britain began to decline as the primary world power, and the United States emerged as a dominant global superpower. According to Quigley, the Anglo-American establishment was primarily concerned in maintaining and expanding the influence of the Western world, and sought to do through combination of economic and political means. He suggests that his network played a major role in the creation of international organizations such as the CFR, right, and the Royal Institute for International Affairs in Britain, right, that, which helped to shape the direction Western policy was taking. Yeah, it is quite groundbreaking, and it is, and actually what he talks about in that book is the Milner roundtables, and this was a British lord. He was called Lord Milner, and he organized a lot of these, back then, even steering committees, along with people such as Cecil Rhodes, who obviously, you've got the Rhodes scholarships. And why is that? Because, of course, people who they want to initiate into the system are Rhodes scholars. They get the funding to be cogs in the machine of the neoliberal world order. Now, Cecil Rhodes, of course, also had a country named after him, Rhodesia. But all of these old British elites, they wanted to maintain the hegemony of the British Empire, and they wanted to do it, well, they wanted to keep it as long as possible, and they wanted to keep their own wealth and power and expand it even. So in order to do that, they essentially collaborated with American elites such as J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and others to establish this so-called Anglo-American establishment. And the United States didn't even have a intelligence service until World War I, basically. So the first intelligence service of the United States was actually, technically it was the Inquiry. It was founded under Woodrow Wilson. It was called the Inquiry. Then later on came the OSS, which was then later rebranded to the CIA after World War II. But the British, they heavily influenced the creation of intelligence services because the British Empire was based on a lot of intelligence operations, especially in India, which was the crown jewel of the British Empire. And they engaged in a lot of espionage and had a lot of experience behind it. Whereas the United States, as an isolationist power, they didn't really have the same tradition of espionage. So that is where all of these institutions, such as the Inquiry and later on the OSS, and of course also the FBI, came into fruition gradually. So that is essentially where it comes from. And there was a lot of British agents sent over to the United States, such as Ian Fleming, the guy who wrote James Bond, actually, and Noah Coward, and a lot of other agents who helped in this establishment of a so-called deep state and a intelligence service, right? So this is essentially what these two books by Carroll Quigley are about. This is just a 15-minute summary. I couldn't get all of the facts through in this summary, but I suggest you go read them by yourselves and enjoy them, because it's Tragedy and Hope is really long, but I would suggest Anglo-American Establishment as a tipping off point, perhaps, because it's shorter, it's more readable in my opinion. So I can recommend both those books, and see you guys for another episode of book review on Free Yourself Globally project.